that we wouldn't have read in the newspaper?
Yeah, but I'd have to go to jail. Now, listen, I can recommend a certain book, but I can't. You know, I will say this, and I know I'm going to sound very diplomatic in saying it, but it also, you know, as Henry Kissinger used to say, it has the additional benefit of being true. And that is this, that every president of the United States, it's not easy becoming president, as you see, is entitled to a worldview. And President Obama had a worldview. And he's very committed to that worldview. That worldview has not changed very much over the last 8 years of administration. And that worldview was in some ways consonant with Israel's worldview, but in many ways not. And the areas where there was dissonance, there would have been dissonance probably with any Israeli government, even if it was a left-wing or right-wing, up-down government. I'll just give you one example. The president is a deep believer in international institutions such as the UN. We aren't. Okay? We aren't. President Bush withdrew his ambassador from the UN Commission on Human Rights. President Obama restored America's ambassador to that commission. That's a problem for us. They condemn us more frequently than any other country on earth combined. In the Human Rights Commission we are the only country in its mandate that says every year we must be condemned for human rights violations. Article 7, it's great. Now, according to the president's worldview, having a U.S. ambassador there is there to fight against Article 7, to stand up for Israel. From our perspective, having a U.S. ambassador to that body endows it with a legitimacy that it shouldn't have. So you can see where there's a clash right on that level. That's one example. There are many other examples. President Obama restored America's diplomatic ties with Syria, with Libya. I think he came to regret it. And then we now know that very shortly after taking office, the president reached out to the supreme leader of Iran in an attempt to make a nuclear agreement there, where, you know, I can understand America's perspective on that. I had the privilege of being 5 years, nearly 5 years, engaged in very high-level talks with the United States on the Iranian nuclear issue, but we had different perspectives. We had different worldviews. I'll give you the pshat of it. The actual pshat of it was this. Our American counterparts believed that the Iranian regime was a rational regime that operated on a cost-benefit analysis. Yes, they were nasty. Yes, they were terrorists, but cost-benefit, and that if properly engaged, the moderates in Iran would be strengthened, and that Iran could I'm actually quoting here, so don't moan too much. I'm quoting from the president. Read his interview with Thomas Friedman and Jeff Goldberg, that the Iranian regime could fulfill a constructive role in the Middle East and actually serve to bridge the gap between Sunni and Shiites. We had a completely different reading of the Iranian regime. It's an irrational regime. It's an irrational regime which, like the Nazis, sometimes took rational steps to reach irrational goals. And that when the leaders of the Iranian regimes came out and said they want to destroy the state of Israel, and we're acting on that impulse by sending terrorists around the world to kill Jews and Israelis, we had to take them very seriously, very seriously. And now, a year into the Iranian nuclear deal, we see that regime has not moderated in any way. It's actually gotten quite worse. So, you know, we had a different worldview. You can proceed from that. Something you don't know about in the papers? I think, I don't know. Read that book. Pretty much in there. Yeah. Are you going to call on people, Nadir? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me? Mr. Deputy Minister.
You have a certain, yichus you have, yeah.
Yes, as one of your Hasidim for many years, and I think you have many followers here who appreciate your unique voice in the world. As a Middle Eastern historian, and with the passage of time, do you see anybody else coming to support the State of Israel as an entity in the Middle East, or will it be a continuation of?
Oh no! We are in such a different place today. As an historian, I will tell you that yes, Israel faces threats that it's never faced before in the form of delegitimization, sometimes referred to as BDS, attempts to sanction us, boycott us. Well, these are serious threats. We have to take them with utmost gravity, and we have to allocate the appropriate resources to them and train the right personnel to fight them. We haven't done that yet. We have to do that. It's one of the things I'm trying to do on my job. But, and this is a huge but, Israel today, 2016, 68 years into our national existence, we are in an incalculably better geostrategic political situation than we've ever been in. When I was your guys' age, the thought of having peace with Jordan and Egypt was utterly unthinkable. When I was your age, the thought of having relations, any relations, with India, China, Russia, what was known as the Soviet bloc, 13 countries, that's more than half of humanity right there. We didn't have any relations. We had horrible relations with them. Today, they're some of our best friends in the entire world. The Prime Minister just paid a state visit to 4 East African countries, not West African countries, East African countries. He's going again. I just came from the UN with the Prime Minister. We met with the heads of 17 African states. African states are lining up to make relations with us. It's happening in South America too. It's already happened in East Asia. Israel today has twice as many relations with twice as many countries in the world as it did 30 years ago.
Mr. Ambassador?
A high-ranking, I'll be right with you, last line, a high-ranking American official who will also go unnamed, several years ago said that if we didn't make certain concessions on the peace process with the Palestinians, Israel would be, quote-unquote, isolated on steroids, quote-unquote. Today, we are less isolated on steroids. Because the world knows that we can provide the world with the 2 things that they need most right now: technology and defense against terror. We are the best at both. That's it.
Mr. Ambassador, the recently agreed upon military agreement between the United States and Israel covering 10 years and however many billions of dollars, I've heard good things about it and not so good things about it, such as the fact that Israel is not permitted to ask Congress for any more money if anything comes up in the future. They have to give it back if they, whatever. I'm just curious to your reaction to the military agreement just signed between the United States and Israel.
Okay, first of all, understand we're talking about, it's called the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding. It's the renewal of the MOU signed by George Bush in 2008, 10 years, that was for $30 billion. The renewed agreement will come into effect in 2018, will be for $38 billion. And it is true that Israel will refrain from asking for what's known as plus-ups from the Congress for missile defense. Every year as an ambassador, I had to go out to the Congress and ask for plus-up, for Iron Dome, for David's Sling, these different systems we had, Arrow 2, Arrow 3. The good news is that the plus-ups are built into the agreement now. We don't have to ask. If the Congress wants to give us more aid, we're not going to say no. We're going to say, okay, but we're not going to go and ask for it. And if there's an emergency, if there's a war, God forbid, we can go and ask. We can ask. So it's built in. That's a very, very good agreement. The fact of the matter is, these negotiations on this MNU began about 3.5 years ago, well in advance of the Iran agreement. We set out our goals in those negotiations. We achieved all of our goals. We're satisfied. More than satisfied, and coming at a time of far-reaching cuts in the U.S. defense budget, it's pretty amazing that we're getting this. So I'm very happy with the agreement.
Probably a slightly different question. With Britain leaving the European Union, is the Israeli establishment concerned about the effects that the European Union will have on the peace process and trade with Israel? Maybe unfair question, given your
No, I don't think
position.
anything has to do with the Brexit, that's all. Listen, one of our greatest challenges in the world is Europe, obviously. That is where the threats sometimes come of boycotts and divestments. That's where the international courts are. That is where the French are mounting an initiative that nobody wants, except for the French. And we have to take it very seriously. But Europe is also our major trading partner in the world. 33% of our trade is with Europe. and culturally, in terms of shared democratic values, and even geographically, they're very, very close. So Europe is our next door neighbor. Usually it should be a much better neighbor. What's happening is great transformations in Europe as well. Not only do we have excellent relations with Eastern European countries, but things are changing in Europe. I just met with the Prime Minister of Norway. Norway, not known as a country that stands up and sings Hatikva every morning, okay? Boy, was that Prime Minister pro-Israel. It's happening in Holland. It's happening slowly, even in Western Europe, because they understand what the countries of Africa and Latin America understand, what we sometimes refer to rather combustibly as TNT, technology and terror. And I had a delegation of French parliamentarians come to visit me. And the head of the delegation said to me, and I'll never forget him saying this, he says, I'm not going to do the accent, I'm not very good at these things. He says, where are your troops? I said, what do you mean? He says, I look out in the street, there's no troops in your street, there's no tanks, there's no armored cars. Have you been to Paris recently? Have you been to Brussels? They look like armed camps. And we had to explain to this French delegation that if there are troops on the street, you already failed. Because the fight against terror begins 5 steps before the troops. The troops are out there, all they can do is shoot. And if you're in Nice, they're not even going to do that. And they came to learn from us. Europeans, the French are coming to learn from us how you can fight terror effectively and remain a democratic, liberal society and not impose on fringe on people's rights. Everyone wants to learn from us. Canary in the cave. And they want our technology. So Europe itself is going to change too. Just wait. Mm-hmm.
Good evening. American Jews often like to wring their hands about how vulnerable Israel is and how terrible things are. But a couple weeks ago, we had in our synagogue Brigadier General Israel Safir, and he painted a very strong picture of Israel, saying they've never been as secure as they are today, especially with all the implosion around the Middle East. He says Israel has never been as powerful and secure in their existence as right now.
And the answer to that is yes, but. It always has to be yes, but. So what's the yes, but? Israel was recently listed as the 8th most powerful country in the world. That's amazing, out of 194 countries. Now, that metric is derived from several factors. It's not just that we're militarily powerful, we're economically powerful. If you've been to Israel, you've seen the infrastructure in Israel, the education, everything. Coherence, cohesive society, many things. We are the 8th. We have 4% growth rate, and which is envy of just about every country around. Very low unemployment, very low inflation. We're looking great. All right, I can give you all of those metrics, but I have to then add, oh, by the way, Hezbollah has 130,000 rockets that can hit any city in the state of Israel. Oh, by the way, Hamas has about 10,000 rockets that have pretty much range, not so much different. We have terror in our streets, often from the Palestinians. We have the Palestinians trying to delegitimize us in the courts of Europe. We are facing a threat from ISIS in the north, but a much greater threat from ISIS in the south, where the Egyptians are fighting a civil war against ISIS. And we have the Iranian nuclear issue, okay? In 9 years from now, this regime could be as bad as it is or worse, and it'll have the ability to not make one, but dozens, perhaps even more nuclear weapons. I call that a challenge, wouldn't you? So, for Israel, it's always going to be the best of times and worst of times. And right now, yes, it's true. We are a remarkably successful and powerful society by any international standards. But we are also a normal country living in the world's most abnormal neighborhood. And we can never forget that. Mm-hmm. Yes, hi.
Hi.
Nice smile.
As Israel's reaching out more and doing more business and trade and exporting weaponry and technology to new trading partners, how do we maintain our moral high ground? How do we
I think it's an issue.
business? How do you do business with someone when you know they're oppressing women, you know that these are not values that we stand for, yet we're engaging with them?
In Knesset, I've been very supportive of efforts to monitor some of our sales around the world and make sure that our arms industry, which is very advanced, And many people want our military technology, not just our, our computer technology, and make sure it's getting into the right hands. It's an issue. You're right. Anybody else? Yes. Shout. It's like being in Knesset here.
Yes.
Shout. Yeah.
There it goes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for the talk on the Druze. I wanted to know if you could tell us the relationship that the Druze outside of Israel have with the state of Israel, and if there's any plans, if they're in danger, if there are any issues with them and their safety, to bring them to Israel.
Well, I intimated in my talk, without going into too much detail, about the situation of the Druze in Syria. And most of the Druze are situated in an area known as Jebel Druze, the Druze mountain. They have this horrific civil war going on around them. Today there was a report in the paper that Hezbollah has been firing from inside Druze areas so that ISIS will fire back at them. And again, without going into details, they should know that we have their backs and we care about them. And to this date, there really haven't been many attacks against the Druze in Syria. And I think that's because the message has gotten out. Some people have gotten the memo. Yes.
Michael, thank you very, very much for another wonderful speech that I heard from you. Going back to the Jews, what can we do as a community, in the lovely community of Los Angeles, to help them?
Well, I think you have to talk to Kuftan, because I can't solicit. I can't even solicit for myself. And but talk to them. I think you'll get a sense that they have some material here you can look at, and I think it's very important that understand that that the Druze. I talked about the covenant of blood, but our relationship with this community is essential for Israel's security. But more than that, it's our diversity is the source of our power and our strength, and it's not just military strength. And this community has so much to give to us, and we can do more. That's all. We just can. I don't know, this kids, young people, they take precedence, we'll get to you. We have to get to this.
Hi, my name's Tyler from Beverly Hills High School.
Well, can't be that funny. We're talking about the Middle East. Come on.
How has Obama damaged the strategic partnership between Israel and America?
How does what?
How has Obama damaged the strategic partnership between Israel?
Well, listen. I'll give you. I don't know. I wish I could laugh at that too. The Obama administration has given Israel more military aid than any other administration before it, and our strategic relationships are at an unprecedented level of cooperation. On the other hand, there's the Iran nuclear issue, which has some impact on our security a little bit, and we can't. We have to grapple with it. We are not opposing the agreement anymore. It's a done deal. We now have to think about how we can better cope with the ramifications of that deal, whether short-term or long-term. And I speak now as an elder statesman here, and I'll tell you that 9 years is a young person's idea of what a long time is. From my perspective, it's about a week. So it's looking very short. Now, yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm very disappointed, because I came to hear about the apartheid Israel. And you tell us that we have partners in the Druze? How can that
we
be?
got partners with Arabs. We got partners.
Oh, that's terrible.
Oh, you're being facetious, right? Okay, good. I'm full of factoids. I hear another community I've worked very closely with is Israeli Christian Arabs, and here's another opportunity for us. And that Israeli Christian Arabs per capita are better educated and more affluent than Israeli Jews. And it's amazing. We want to that they're increasingly going into the army, and they're following in the direction of the Druze, and we have to encourage that. We have opportunities here.
There's a large Druze village up in the Golan Heights on the way up to the
Majlis Shams.
Right, and they seem to be very insular, and their religion is somewhat secretive.
It is.
And the question I have is, how much does that Druze community want to integrate themselves with the rest of Israeli society?
This year, for the first time since 1967, 10% of that community has applied for Israeli citizenship. And that number's going up and up. Bobby Bennett.
Good to see you.
Hey, Bobby.
Great to see you.
Hi, Mark.
The president said a couple things last week. One, I don't know if he's referred, when he spoke to the General Assembly, he referred to Judea and Samaria as occupied Palestinian territory.
I saw, we heard that. You might imagine. Yes.
I don't know if that represents change, but he also talked about the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people.
He's always talked about the legitimate aspirations.
But what does he view as their aspirations? Does he view as their aspirations a state side by side with a Jewish state?
He does.
Or does he view, how after 8 years does he still believe
Listen,
that?
you may imagine I'm a close follower of everything the president says. And you can put together all of his statements going back to 2009 and come up with a parameter. And in those parameters are the 2 states for 2 peoples, 67 borders with swaps, probably a realization of the Palestinian aspirations for a capital in Jerusalem, some type of solution to the refugee problem. But what's interesting is that the president, since November 2011, has talked about Israel as the Jewish state, which is a major accomplishment for Israeli diplomacy, one which the Europeans do not agree, the Russians do not agree. For us, it's absolutely essential. To me, that's the essence of the conflict, that the Palestinians will never accept Israel as the Jewish state. They didn't in the 1930s, the 40s, any time. It's the reason the Palestinians have been offered a state more frequently than any other people in modern history, have turned it down almost always with violence, and for one reason, because the price of accepting a Palestinian state has been accepting a Jewish state, and they won't do it. And the fact that the president says that, to me, is very significant.
Hi. I wanted to get your opinion of the recent rhetoric coming from Abbass. I've been astounded by the comments that the Balfour Declaration in Britain is being sued, that they're naming places after the killers of the Olympic people in 76, the Israeli Olympic. I mean, more and more of the rhetoric in the UN and everywhere from Abbass is just outstanding. I mean, he's shown no desire for peace, and I'd like you to comment on what his... Why aren't people more commenting on that, and what do you think he's up to that he's...
Well, I know what he's up to. He's trying to delegitimize us. So it's that is, he came out and stated, he wrote a great op-ed in the New York Times in May 2010, where he said, okay, we're entering a new phase in the conflict about Israel. We're going to internationalize and legalize the conflict. That's what it's about. You know, conventional warfare didn't work, terror didn't work, now we're going to try this. And that's what it's about. I had an article about a week and a half ago in Newsweek, you can look it up, that talks precisely about this issue, about Palestinian incitement and what it means. But the fact is, if we're going to have peace with the Palestinians anytime, you cannot have peace with a population that has raised its kids on the notion that killing Jews is wonderful. Because that's what they do. Over the years, I've developed a pretty strong stomach about this stuff. And when I was before I got my present post, I was the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee in Knesset. It's a classified committee, and our hearings are closed. But I held a hearing on Palestinian incitement, and I got a look at the information that is being presented by the Palestinian Authority, not by Hamas, to Palestinian young people, on textbooks, on Facebook, in new media, and I gotta tell you, I came out of that meeting retching. You cannot believe the things that they put up on. They're teaching young kids exactly where to stab Jews in the neck, to kill them. The Jews are worse than monkeys and pigs. This is the Palestinian Authority, by the way, that are supported by, taxpayers' money. Taxpayers' money in this country goes to pay, if a Palestinian kills Jews, okay, he goes to prison, he or she goes to prison. They get subsidies from the Palestinian Authority. They get more subsidies for the amount of Jews they kill. You get more if you kill 2, you get more if you kill 3. Your family is supported, and when you come out, you're promised a job in the Palestinian Authority. Now, is that preparing? I gotta tell you a great story. I wrote this article for Newsweek, but I submitted it first to CNN. CNN Online. I've had a long relationship with CNN, sometimes problematic. I'm going to talk to CNN right now, that's why I want to say this. And I said the following line in the article, I said that I said that while the Palestinians are naming their streets and schools and soccer teams and summer camps for mass murderers of Jews, we in Israel are naming our streets for Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Rabin, the pioneers of peace. I get a letter from the standards department of CNN saying, we cannot publish your piece because you called Menachem Begin a man of peace. And if you'll take out Menachem Begin, we'll publish your article. I said, Menachem Begin stays or the peace goes. The piece is in Newsweek. That's CNN. Amazing. That's crazy stuff. I'll show you the.
Good.
I want to. Yes.
Deputy Minister, a quick question. I realize you started with saying that you couldn't talk about Trump or Clinton, but my question is, the Republican platform has changed dramatically compared to the Democratic platform, in that it no longer calls for a two-state solution. It says it won't pressure Israel one way or another. I was wondering if one party or the other gets into office, if that makes it easier to work with.
I guess I'm not going to comment on that. I'm really not, because it's intervening in America's political, internal political process, and they can't do this. It's a no-win situation. Trust me on this one. It's not. You know, obviously we can have differences with the United States between allies. You know, sometimes we work them out better than others. But here, you know, after 8 not easy years between these two governments, we reached the MOU agreement, which was significant. At the end of the day, here's the bottom line. Can I end with a couple of bottom lines? Do you have a second? Here's just the fundament. This is the bedrock truth. The bedrock truth was this. You have this little country that, geographically speaking, is the size of a fingernail clipping. Okay? It's called the State of Israel. And it's located at the nexus point of 3 continents. And it's got an army that's more than twice as big as the British and French armies combined. All right? And it's democracy. And that, if it weren't for that country being there, that little sliver, then Egypt would fall, Jordan would fall, all of North Africa would fall, and all of the Gulf would fall to ISIS or worse. And there'd be a huge black hole opened up on the very rim of Western civilization. Everybody, whether they're European or Americans, anybody in a position of responsibility understands that. Everybody. Second bedrock. Israel has no substitute for the United States of America as our ultimate ally. There's no other country that shares our values, that looks very familiar, that gives us $38 billion over 10 years in military aid. We have no substitute for that. Support for Israel in this country is close to an all-time high. 71.3% of Americans define themselves as pro-Israel. It's amazing. The support for Palestinians in this country hasn't gone up at all. It's completely flatlined. Yeah, but that's the overall. Remember, the overall support for this country is amazing. It keeps on going up, not down. Because people understand what I just said. There's no substitute. Because they also understand that there's no substitute for the United States for the State of Israel as an ultimate ally. There's no other country in the world that's going to have that military, that's going to be democratic, and democratic in a way which really no other country in the world is democratic, because we're the few countries in the world that's never known a second of non-democratic governance, and the only country in that very short list that has never experienced a moment of peace. And we are proudly, unabashedly, unreservedly pro-American. I can't find anybody burning flags. Everybody understands that. Republican, Democrat, even the French understand that. We got to go to the TV. Who is? CNN, Atlanta. Should I tell them? Thank you very much.